Welcome to another installment of Season 2 with Real Wealth Podcast, hosted by Leading Edge Financial Planning. And I'm your host, Michael Proctor. I am graced with the presence today of Mr. David Riffel. He is a partner over at Alloy Architecture. Before that, what was it again, Dave?
Used to be called Howard and Hilmer Architecture.
Right, Howard and Hilmer. You've worked on a lot of really great projects that many Wichitans would recognize, and I think well beyond Wichita as well.
Yeah, beyond.
And beyond. Dave he got in on the ground floor back when it was Howard and Hilmer.
Way back in when, in the back in the 80s.
Yes.
Way back in the 80s. I was in the last century.
That's right.
Definitely.
He is a famous author these days. He wrote Mentoring Warriors. It's got a lot of commentary about mentorship and a workbook that goes along with that. In fact, I just finished up a group of guys going through and discussing topics of mentorship and following the Lord together and helping one another along in different stages of life, which is really fantastic. And the first time I stumbled across Dave was at church together back about probably a decade ago. But I'm so excited to have you on today and learn more about you and your life and lessons you've learned along the way in business and relationship and living the best life possible at the time that you have left is our focus, and also that entrepreneurial side. But I'm going to start off at a kind of a influx point of your life, as I understand it. You had open heart surgery about 7 years ago.
Right.
That in a way opened your heart.
Yeah, I did. As I always like to say, when you're in your 50s and whether you love Jesus or not, you have open heart surgery, it rocks your world. And your mortality comes into view. And it's like, why am I even here? What is my purpose? Now, thankfully, I had quadruple bypass 2 weeks after my daughter's wedding. So it was all kind of unexpected. But, I came out of it successfully. I'm still here. It was quite the surgery. You ever read the medical report about it? It's kind of interesting when they have to jumpstart your heart 4 times before it starts to beat. It's kind of interesting. You realize even in those kind of things, the hand of God's there kind of working. So I'm here today. But it really gets the guy to think about, why am I here? What am I doing? So long before I had that heart surgery, I always had a heart for mentoring. And that coupled with my desire, my interest in writing, that spurred me on to what we've done today is we formed a nonprofit, a 501c3 called Mentoring Warriors. And the website is mentoring-warriors.com. And so basically our whole purpose is to equip men on how to mentor. And then we particularly focus on what we consider the warrior stage of life, which is ballpark kind of 18 to 30. Those young men, that first stage of adulthood, a lot of first-time choices. And so kind of using some of my experience as a mentorless warrior when I was in my 20s and into my early 30s, that I used some of that and kind of put together a book. So, but that whole heart surgery, it's kind of interesting to say this now, but I'm glad it happened. I'm glad it happened from the perspective of it woke me up. Not that life was bad or life was heading in the wrong direction, but it was kind of the kick in the pants from the Lord's perspective to say, Dave, I'm not done with you. We have more to do. So, that heart surgery was, and I live with it today. One of my bypasses, interestingly enough, developed an inoperable aneurysm. So now I'm on blood thinners and you have to take all these meds and get blood tests done every month. But I've been a good boy. So my cardiologist, I went in for my annual report, or my annual checkup here back in August, and he looked at all my stats, and I've been doing my 150 minutes of cardio every week. And he said, you know what? We're going to skip all the testing this year. Come back next year. Have a good year. So that was encouraging for me.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah.
And as we were talking about it, can you share a little bit more about what led up to the heart surgery? Were there some things that happened before there that were maybe indicative or?
Sure. So my wife is a Canadian, and so we have a cottage in Eastern Ontario on a lake called Round Lake, and our little cottage is called Sandor Mick, Sandy, Doris, and Mickey. That's Sandy and her two parents, Doris and Mickey. Great place. It's about 70 some years old. It's like not Kansas. Okay. It's like trees and clear water and all that stuff. There's this huge, big provincial park up there called Algonquin. And it was started in 1893. And it's like the size of the state of Connecticut. And it has about 1,500 kilometers of canoe routes and hiking trails and one road through it. So in 2015, so that was about 7 years ago, my daughter had just got engaged. And so our new future son-in-law had never been hiking, never done any of that kind of stuff, and never been to Canada. So we took him up to the cottage that summer. And so our son Justin and I decided we're going to take him on his first ever backpacking trip. So we went back up into the interior, where basically if you don't have a satellite phone, you don't have any communication. I mean, your cell phones don't work. So we backpack in and we get to this nice little bay on Stratton Lake. And my son, who was 19 at the time, swims out in this little cove to a rock, boulder sticking out of the water and sitting out there. And as I say, he was just sitting there picking zits, kind of doing whatever. And my son-in-law, future son-in-law, Aaron, and I were sitting there on the shore, this rocky shore. And I look over at Aaron and say, I can do that. So I start swimming out there, and it's cold Canadian water. So it's probably in the 50s, the water is. And I'm doing good until I decide to flip over and do backstrokes. And all of a sudden, I get this massive pain in my left shoulder blade. And I start losing strength. I couldn't even get the words out, Justin, or help me. And it wasn't for the fact that my son-in-law, Aaron, saw that I was struggling. He yelled out to Justin. I mean, the water was literally up to my lips. And I thought to myself, this is it. This is it. And next thing I know, he's pulling me up on that rock. And I still to this day don't remember exactly how he got me back to shore. But I just lay low in my hammock. And we kind of took it easy the rest of the night. And then I had to hike out the next day. So I get, all that happens. And then we pack up, and a week later, we go back to Wichita here and decide I better go see a cardiologist. And so they start running all these nuclear stress tests and all these things, and things weren't looking all that nice. I didn't have a heart attack, but I was on the verge of it, apparently. So I always say my son saved my life. And then by early December, that was July, so December, my cardiologist said, yeah, I think we need to probably have a heart cath. Just do that. We might end up putting a couple of stents in and you'll be good to go. 4 or 5 days out of work, it'd be good to go. I thought, okay. He said, get your daughter married and we'll do it. First of the year. I thought, all right. So we did. I go in and they do the heart cath. And next thing you know, I have the widowmaker, as they call it. My right coronary artery was 95% blocked. And next thing I know, I'm in the hospital at St. Francis, Via Christi, and having open heart surgery.
Wow.
Yeah.
So did you wake up and they told you what was going on before they did it, or they just did it in one go?
What do you mean, the surgery?
Yeah.
No, they put me under, and it was total. I think it was a 4-hour surgery.
So you went in thinking you were getting a cath?
No, I went and got the cath.
Oh, okay.
And they go, yeah, this is stents aren't going to fix it.
Okay.
So they sent me home for a week, and then I had the heart surgery.
I see. So it was 2. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then I've had 2 more heart caths after that. When the one after my surgery, they discovered the inoperable aneurysm on my one artery. And then I've had another one after that 3 years ago. And then I skipped this year. So
okay,
I got to keep working, keep exercising is what I got to do. But, the whole thing talks about, like I mentioned, it's more that thing about your mortality and purpose on the earth. Why does God have me here still? Why am I getting more time? What's kind of the new norm? A realignment of how I handle stress at work, which, frankly, I'll be honest, being an architect is kind of a stressful job.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So.
And you came out of a pretty stressful program too, right? clear back in the
Oh, and
day.
architecture, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that coupled with my personality of being hard on myself, I don't give myself a lot of slack. So, there's that part of me that's very, I call it consistent, reliable, dependable. My wife sometimes says I'm boring. I call it consistency. But sometimes I'm too hard on myself and I don't always extend grace to myself, you know, when I need to and take a break. It's okay. So I've had to learn some of that in the last 7 years. Not to be a slacker at work. That's not it at all. Not being a slacker at all. It's just remanaging and rethinking how you're going to use your time. Try to be a little more effective in terms of how you work.
I can't believe the people that make it through the K-State architecture program. I don't even think they sleep. They don't. They really don't. I mean,
well, I will tell you this. I never spent an all-nighter at K-State.
Well, that's good.
The latest I ever was in studios until about 1:00 in the morning.
Okay.
And then what I would often do is decide, you know what, I'm going to go home and sleep for about 5 hours or for whatever. And I would walk through the whole studio and just see kind of where everybody was at with their projects. Go home, sleep, come back, and I'd walk through the studio again for all the guys that's, staying up. And what they accomplished while I slept was nothing. They should have gone to bed.
Sure.
But anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, I never did spend an all-nighter at K-State, but I came close to it.
I just don't see how that's healthy, but I mean, neither here nor there. I'm not, whatever.
I think spending all-nighter in studio is more for social, hanging out.
Yeah.
Just hanging out and playing your music and doing whatever. So
anyways, yeah. So now you're an accomplished architect. What are some of the projects you've worked on?
So I've been with it's called Alloy Architecture, but originally it was called Howard and Hilmer, and we changed the name in 2017, about 5 years ago, after both of the two original founding partners retired. We changed the name. So some of the projects I've worked on, we used maybe some clients would be Ascension Via Christi. I've been working on projects. Our firm has been working on projects since the early 80s, long before St. Francis and St. Joe merged. I was involved in design on St. Teresa Hospital out in West Wichita. Some other projects I've worked on would be Koch Industries. We've been their architects for virtually all of their projects at the Wichita campus since 1997, last 25 years. It's one of those things where over there we started making some relationships, just some what we call move management projects where they want to remodel a floor or just an area. And then we started doing, this sounds like grunt work, but we started doing bathroom remodels, And then after that, we started working on maybe more of a floor renovation. And then next thing you know, they give you a building renovation. And then in 2012, we started doing studies on ways to maybe expand the campus. So if you're in Wichita and you're familiar, we end up taking a 125-acre campus and expanding it to almost 300 and some acres, almost triple size. And then we rerouted 37th Street, and then we did a whole new building H. And so those are all my projects, working on all of that. And that's fun, and they're a great client to have, and just great.
So they can pay their bills. That's nice.
Yep, they pay their bills. Yeah, and it's just been great. Another project we've been involved with, which has some Wichita notoriety, is Mark Arts, and it's at the corner of 13th and Rock Road, and that was a fun one. That was a piece of property owned by the Koch Foundation, and so the Kochs donated the land and were big contributors to the project, and just really using some of our design methodology of how we go about what we call vision, function, and form. So we want to capture the vision. In other words, what are those intangible values, for an example, that Mark Arts has? They started out as the Wichita Center for the Arts. So what are some of their vision? Where do they want to be in 5 years, and 10 years, and 20 years? Kind of dream with them. And we went through that whole process. And then after you figure out what their vision is, we start looking at function, how things work, and not just from a space planning perspective, but functionally in a management, operational perspective. How do things work? And sometimes we do things because of the environment or the spaces we have. But if those spaces were changed, maybe it would change the way we would operate as a business or as an organization. So we do that. And then we also looked at form. what would be the form of the building, what's it going to look like, the shape. So all those things came together to give you what we have today, which is phase one of that project.
Oh,
So,
there might be more, huh?
oh, there's always dreaming. When you're working with an art, it's basically a design of a park. It's a park with an art school in it. And so they have an art school in there, they have a
I didn't realize
gallery,
that.
and they also have like their event center.
I knew about the event and the art component. I didn't know there was an art school.
Yeah, there's actually an art school there.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it really is. You can take different kind of classes. There's one I really whenever I decide to retire, I guess I'm going to take one on lithography. Lithoprints. I'd love to do something like that. I even actually went out there one time. We have dogs. My wife, we had one of our dogs. So I went out there and I commissioned one of their 2D art, and one of the students out there to do an art portrait of our dog, and so there's just some great stuff, some sculpture, clay, pottery classes out there and things like that. It's a good group.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, they got some really neat displays over there.
Yeah. So those are some of the projects we've worked on. I've also worked with Friends University on projects and just other projects. We're working with a client now, Foley Caterpillar, on a lot of different projects and all different types. I always say when you're in the Midwest, you can't necessarily specialize in one particular genre of architecture. You have to be kind of a generalist. And so we do a lot of schools, K through 12, universities, hospitals, healthcare. I'm doing senior living right now. There's a client that's just a great client, a nonprofit. It's called Blue Stem Communities. And so we did a assisted living project for him about 4 years ago in Heston called Showalter Villa, or Mullet Place now, what it's called. And now we're just working on the wrap up of about an overall $10 million project at their sister community in Newton called Kidron Bethel. And so a new chapel and basically renovating 2 at a time, 65 private nursing home rooms, and fixing up a new restaurant in there, and just a lot of different things that we're doing. It's really fun projects.
Nice. I may have to have you do some work in here at some point.
Yeah, there you go.
I don't know if I could make the cut, but
hey, no job is too small. No job is, I'll do anything. It's really what it is. So
good deal. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about mentorship and how that helps us live the best life possible. Because it's not always about the one you're mentoring. Because honestly, when you give, you get. And when you're growing with somebody, you're growing too. But why don't you share maybe a little bit of the overarching theme of your book and your program, your vision, and a few points that people might be able to take away with today?
So, as I mentioned, really mentoring warriors came out of, as a result, in the last 6-7 years of my heart surgery and just forming that. And we have a board of directors now, and it's really been good launching that. We're a small ministry, kind of a small organization. But so really what I did was, because of my love for writing, I went to Wichita State Department of Psychology. I talked to Dr. Greg Meissen, and I just said, hey, here's my question. What does it take to have, qualitatively speaking, what does it take to have a healthy mentoring relationship with young warrior age men, kind of that 18 to 30 year range? So he put me in touch with one of his star students, Eric Chromitis, and Eric did some qualitative research. And the way it kind of worked out to be was we identified at least 3 different men that mentor young guys. And then we identified 3 young guys that are mentored by older guys. And then I also developed kind of a 35 question self-assessment on 6 different categories that guys, men in general deal with. It seems like whenever I'm meeting with a young guy and mentoring him, these 6 areas always seem to come up with life. So they did that qualitative research for the book. We did a beta test on all the self-assessment. And it was kind of cool because I helped write those self-assessment questions and thinking that, well, Wichita State would have a lot of edits to those questions. And reality was, he said, nope, they're pretty spot on questions. So we didn't change much on that, which so he thought our data that we got was going to be pretty good in that. So those 6 categories are self-management. So those are things like everything from how to get to work on time, to financial management, to just budgeting life and how you spend your time. Life skills is another one. I always say, you can go to YouTube and watch how to change a toilet or replace your brakes or something, but there's something to be said too about having someone who's been there and done that come along with you to help you. So life skills, self-management. Another one is education and career. And so a lot of times young guys are like, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And so I like to call it helping them discover what is their unique kingdom voice. In other words, how are they wired? Mike, you're different. You're wired differently than me. And that's perfectly fine, but it's finding your niche. And some guys have to go through what I say is up to 9 different careers, not jobs, careers before they figure out. And it's just kind of a journey and process. So that's the third one. The fourth one is relationships. So everything from how do young guys leave mom and dad healthy? Often they either join the workforce or they go off to university or they end up getting married, relationships, employee relationships. What if you're a young warrior and you're an entrepreneur? How do you build relationships with, your potential business networking and all those kind of things? And then we also talk about faith, because demographically, statistically, young warrior age guys are the least likely to go to church. They're the least likely to pursue faith, even if they grew up in church. They tend to take a break, especially in those younger years, the 18 to kind of I'll call the college age. And then either something will hit, either they'll get a crisis or they fall in love and they realize now they got a family and, oh, maybe I need to start making faith more important. So we just talk about what is faith? How do you have a relationship with Christ? What does that look like? So those are ones. And then the other one is identity. So manhood identity. And in our culture, that is something that is so in flux, in question. What does it mean to be a man? Is there a certain look that you have? And that all leads to the other issues of purity, pornography, sexual purity. What do I do? What does it mean to be a man sexually? All those kind of things. So we try to cover all those areas because eventually, like I said, when we mentor guys, we're talking about one or all 6 of those topics in one way or the other. So the book helps men understand kind of where warrior age guys are and what they're thinking, but it gives you some tools so that you can start building those relationships. So that's really what the book's about. And then the boot camp that you mentioned that we went through, we go through our book in about 8 weeks, and we have a field manual that just kind of helps guide through those topics of discussion, gives you some action items with the goal of maybe by the end of the 8 weeks, maybe you've got the name or 2 of a young guy that maybe you can start to mentor, start to build a relationship with.
Yeah, my guys are a little younger than the target. They're like 11 and 9.
Yeah, but here's the deal, Mike. Even now, those same principles will start applying right now, because I'm going to tell you right now, there's 2 things that your boys want. They've been wanting them since they were toddlers. And that's, Daddy, do you delight in me? And Daddy, do I have what it takes to become a man? And they're asking that. So a 6-year-old or a 9-year-old is going to ask that. They're just thinking the next year, Dad, can I ride the bike? Can I shoot that pistol? Can I do whatever? But then once they get to be teenagers, it's the next thing, that's the next stage. It's constantly. I just actually yesterday, I was at the office and my cell phone rings, and it's a dad and his 12-year-old son from Vermont. And they had read my book, Mentoring Warriors, and I had a recommendation for him because their son was 12, going just kind of that starting off in puberty, to go on a manhood little trip. And they did some things and used some resources I recommended. And they just called from the top of a mountain near Stowe, Vermont to call me and tell me thank you.
Cool.
Because of the fact that it had an influence on them. And it was the son, the 12-year-old boy, Wyatt, it was his idea to call me. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah. Good for him.
Yeah. I wish I would have had that when I was 12 years old growing up. So what I'm saying is the mentoring principles, even though the book is written for focusing on 18 to 30-year-old men, those principles apply regardless of the age you're in.
Well, yeah, and catch them early. I mean, because I remember when I was that age, I didn't have the kind of guidance in one-on-one life uh, equipping that this book digs into. And I wish it would have been really nice, but I realize that most don't.
Right. We've done some studies and with mentoring warriors, we found out that in general, I'll just pick on Wichita as an example. Metro area has maybe 650,000 people. So population wise of those young men, 18 to 30 is about 7.5% of the population. So roughly 50,000 people, like 50,000 guys. And the best we can tell, about 2 to 4% have a mentor. So, 1,000, 2,000 guys may sound like a lot of guys having mentors, but think about those who don't. So there is great opportunity out there. And I would say too, that virtually everybody who's gone through the boot camp, the older guys, I would say probably 90% have never been mentored themselves. And so they come in like, I'm not sure I can do this. I never had this when I was growing up. And the cool thing is to see not only relationships built within the boot camp guys, but then them realizing, you know what? I can do this with the help of God, and I had strength from Him. I can build these relationships. And it may be with your son, or it may be with a nephew, or some young guy you work with at the office, or somebody at church, or a guy. I mean, people in that age group, believe me. Right. And some of them are single. Some of them are married. I know some guys that they just turned 30 and they got 3 kids, and they're trying to juggle life and budgets. And what do we do? Building a house in the middle of all that stuff. How to get their finances ready. So it's just great opportunities. And invariably, you'll have some sort of experiences, even failures in your own life, that can be helpful in the story that God's trying to write in that young man. So,
yeah, that's one of the, I guess, the most my favorite things about our own human failure is the redemption that can come with that, in helping someone else get through their failures or their struggles or their like whatever the thing is.
right.
By working through it, working it out, not just burying it or saying, someday I need to work on that.
Yeah.
But really getting through it, we can help others so much more.
Yeah. And I would say with that too, and we've had this conversation in one of our boot camps early on, and I'll bring it up here too, but we men think we can just, like you said, stuff it. I'll figure it out myself. I don't need to tell anybody. I don't need any help. And yet the issue of being vulnerable, the issue of saying, I need help. I don't know how to do this. I'm walking into territory that I have no clue how I'm going to handle this. And being able to go to a brother and say, dude, I'm broken right now. I don't know what to do. My finances are a mess. My relationships are a mess. I don't know how to raise these kids right. I got things going on at work. I don't know what to do. But being that kind of a man that says, will you help me? Not will you fix the problem for me, but will you walk with me through some of this? That is the most courageous thing a man can do. I mean, you and I have talked about that. Vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability in a man is one of the most courageous things he can do.
Yeah, you just wrote a blog post on it, right?
Yeah, I did. In fact, here a few weeks ago, we had a Mentoring Warriors backpacking trip down in southeast Kansas to an area of rocks and stuff that hardly anybody knows it's down there by Independence, Kansas. And we're sitting around the campfire talking about this issue of courageous vulnerability. And, there's something about a campfire and guys, you can't quite see each other's faces through the flames, but the things that guys start to open up, hey, I'm struggling with anger, or, I just got a purity problem. And can you guys help me? 12 men who, frankly, all pretty much met each other for the first time, cumulatively right there. It was just awesome. It was just really awesome to see what happened. So yeah, those are some things that happen when you put yourself out there and say, you know what, I need to be mentored myself.
Yeah. And one of the best responses, especially when you have there's the whoever it is, it says, hey, can you help me through this? And I mentioned this in our Mentoring Warriors boot camp, but I sought that out a couple times. It's really hard to get that where you actually find somebody who's willing to actually do that and stick with you. I talked, so today's Tuesday. I talked with Eric again. We talk every day. But it wasn't until over a year into us doing that I said, Eric, you know what? I keep waiting for you to bail on me. But that level of walking with changes a person.
It does.
And it doesn't, I mean, really, it doesn't take much, but knowing that someone is walking with you is just transformational because they're not, they're not there to shame. They're not there to beat you up. And I'm kind of like you in some different ways, where I can be hard on myself, and that's something I got to work on. I don't need someone else there to beat me up too.
You make a good point. This idea of walking with somebody for the long haul. Yeah, are you going to bail on me too? You're going to dump me. You're going to take me out for lunch for a couple times and that's it. And then I'll never hear from you again. Or are you going to walk with me through whatever junk I'm going through? And that it's so. I do think that one of the things that makes for a good mentor is he's safe. He is non-judgmental. I mean, look, if you go and vent to your mentor that you've done some stupid stuff, it's wrong. You don't need him to remind you, right? But it's that idea that there is hope. There's redemption. So I know of a young guy that struggled with pornography and it's messed some things up in relationships. But he's working through it. He's owning it. He doesn't need me to tell him what's wrong. He already knows. But there's always hope. And that's where I think having a mentor who sticks with you, who believes in you, who loves you, no matter what, that's the kind of man-to-man relationships that I believe ultimately what God intended men to have. And I think very, very few men on the planet ever experience that.
You have to be right. Because if every man had that, we'd be living in an entirely different world.
Exactly.
Which I think strikes at the heart of what your book's all about, which is so cool. I'm in downtown Wichita Rotary, and we had a guest speaker. I don't have his name off the top of my head, but he has the neighborhoodproject.org, I think is what it's called. And he did a talk, but on the economics of how neighboring well actually benefits the entire community, how building personal connection, relationship, face-to-face relationship, communication, working together, all these things and all the health benefits it has. But yet we live in a society that is more and more segmented and isolating. Even though our population is growing, we're figuring out how to do it without having to interact face to face. How do you see that being fleshed out in matching up mentors of, okay, it's a lot easier to retreat. It's a lot easier to go do your own thing. It's a lot easier to hide out and not have to deal with real life or real issues or take a good long look inside. How do you see that issue being resolved?
So if I understand the question, how do we make connections?
Yeah. How do we create connections where there's a guy who wants to be mentored, finding someone who's willing to mentor.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
So this last week we had a guy, Mike Hearn. He was able to kind of speak to kind of our our final week of boot camp, kind of commissioned us and kind of give us the charge. And he gave 3 different ways to start a mentoring relationship. So this may play into what you're talking about. One is the young guy says, light bulb, I need a mentor. I'm going to go find one. Now, if I'm talking high school kids, guys, I'll be honest, unless they've got some really bad crisis, that's the last thing on their mind. But generally the ones that are motivated themselves, I need this. What do I do? Where do I go find one? And they pursue it. They're going to reap benefits. So there's initiative on their part. That's one. The second is you see an older man would say, you know what? I've been noticing that guy at church or whoever it is, where we're at, he needs a mentor. And you go initiate. That's another way. So initiation is important. And then the other one would be you're assigned. So for an example, Mike was actually talking to me the other day at his church. They're going to do something where they're going to take some older men and then have a chance that you could sign up to be a prayer warrior for like a high school student. So same gender, guys to guys and gals to gals, and then kind of initiate it that way too. So I know that some of our church we went to at the time, they had this prayer warrior thing. And that was one where I signed up for a couple of guys, Ryan and Nolan, because they were the same age as my son, Justin. And I thought, well, they're new to church. I'll get to know them because I'll be in my son's, youth group, small group, and be at our house playing basketball and kind of stuff. And so that led into 10 to 12 years now of mentoring them. So I think the key word there is taking initiative. So as I joke around with some of the guys, like with Garrett and some others, we go, well, nothing's going to happen when you live in your basement apartment with an unlisted phone number and nobody knows where you're at. You have to get out there. And sometimes it's kind of like, how painful is life going to really have to get before you get out there and start looking for help? Taking that initiative and say, you know what? This pain is to the point where I got to get answers. And I know they're going to have some answers in some of those people that have maybe been down the path further than me. So initiative, I think, is important. I mean, look, I live in the suburbs. I live in a cul-de-sac. I'm going to hit the button on my cross track, drive in my garage, hit the button, and I'll be inside until I leave the next day. Did I ever get to go see my neighbors? So shame on me too. I will say too that when it's some more summertime and you're more outside, it's easier. And it is nice to have a cul-de-sac because over the years that we've been there, and especially probably more to my wife's kudos, is taking initiative to get to know all of our neighbors, and build some of those relationships. So now when we need everything from a stick of butter to, oh, my neighbor has cancer, and they're letting us pray with them,
Yeah.
It's kind of those just one step at a time, building relationships kind of thing.
I moved into the place I'm living in about 6 months ago, and I know 1, 2, kind of 3 in my cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
And I now one of them I'm connected on Facebook, so I can message that way. But otherwise, I just got to go the old-fashioned way, go knock on a door.
Yeah.
I didn't actually get any of their phone numbers. But I had to admit to my table when we were talking about this, like neighboring well, I said, I hate to admit, the only phone number I have is the guy behind me with 3 border collies who go berserk at 10:30 at night. Because I had to walk around. I was like, dude, I can't even talk on the phone at my own.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But and so that was anyway, so that's a really cool project. I hope to have him on.
Yeah.
Kind of in the more neighborhood sense, but
Sure.
but in the mentoring sense, like, okay, how does somebody who wants to be mentored find someone? And I'm sure that if they called you up or messaged or called me up, and I mean, we can help them get connected. At least here locally. So there's a lot of options there. And then also just recognize, like, hey, if you go pop into a church, like, there's people there that have been working through life. Nobody gets through life unscathed. Someone a little further along than you are, and hey, that's a great place to start.
Go to our website, mentoring-warriors.com. We have an article that you can search on the search bar. It says finding a mentor. And it'll give you some kind of steps, even gives you kind of a role play. of what you need to do and your, things. And sometimes I always encourage, if you kind of sort of know this guy, but you're not really, hey, could we get together and just do it on a trial basis? Hey, let's get together for the next 6 weeks. And maybe it includes a Bible study, and maybe includes some other things, or you know what, let's go hunting. Let's go do some things. We're just going to go sit in a deer stand and just, be together, and just try it out. And then with the caveat, and you both understand this going into it, that, hey, if it's not gelling, it's not there. You can shake hands and be fine, but it's not like, see you later, I'm back to my old self again. No, we're going to help you find somebody else. It's that kind of thing. Yeah.
In your view, obviously there's the vision of how the one who's not as far along in life can benefit. In your view, what does the one who's mentoring get out of this deal?
Well, as I say, mentoring's a two-way street. I have grown so much from these young guys, whether it's figuring out which handgun I need to buy. We're going to go do some target practice. Seriously, that kind of thing, to even learning some tricks about backpacking and camping, to fishing, to just things like that, to just technology. I'm an old guy. I need some help. But I think some of that's been good. And I think some things I've also learned from some of the young guys is to have a little more, what's the word I want to use? Spontaneity, kind of loosen up a little bit, be willing to try a few different things. I'm not talking anything immoral. I'm just saying, just, just different
Sure.
just different things. And just, be kind of just more, enjoy life a little more. So I've learned lots of things from these guys. And then when they face a crisis, and whether it's a challenge with pornography and purity, or it's some relational issue or something, what I benefit from it is it gets me thinking through those things, and maybe digging into the Bible, the scriptures, and say, well, what does the Bible really say about those issues? Or are we living by some kind of just religious constructs that we've put together that's really more like legalism? And some of those things are just fine. We don't need to be legalistic about certain things, So just kind of understanding those kind of things in life, just kind of enjoying it.
Um, I typically go to Pathway, but Life. I took the kids to Life Church because they had their like fall stuff going on, which is really fun. But so Craig made it actually a pretty entertaining, but also a really great sermon on purity in marriage, and also that extends into singlehood and all that stuff. But it's so hard to take the shame out of that side, so that somebody can look at it for what it is, because it's so hard to separate that when we live in a culture that it's either you're not shaming it outright and it's just okay and not going to harm you or not going to harm relational, even harm your neurobiology, which there's a lot of reality to that. But how do you separate that shame and create that safe environment to where you can lead them to a point where they can look at things for what they are and make as level-headed of a decision as they can. But that's really hard. Even as good as Pastor Craig Rochelle can make it entertaining and impactful at the same time, that's you have to have gone through it yourself to be there, to be able to walk somebody through it.
Yeah.
And I think that really gets at the core of what mentorship is. But yeah, so thanks for being a writer and providing some resources. I want to get on to maybe a couple other topics. What maybe was one of the bigger lessons in life you've learned? Just switching gears a little bit, because growth is always a piece of what we want to discuss here and pass on. Hey, what was a really profound lesson that you feel like you've learned, or a big turning point, other than your heart attack, which was obviously huge, but other than that?
Oh gosh, let's see. I'm thinking in terms of different areas, like career-wise, some big lessons.
Yeah.
big takeaways. I think as in any kind of business, you need to be forthright. You need to be upfront, truthful. You need to have ethics that speak well, a reputation, integrity. Not that you're a perfect person, but even to own it when you've made a mistake and to work with clients. Sometimes things, designing is not a perfect science. It's architecture is a mix of art and aesthetics, creativity, as well as the whole engineering analytical side of things, and so sometimes, you work through things, you make the best assumptions you can, especially when you're doing a project that's like a renovation, of a 100-year-old building. And you thought that was a bearing wall over there, and it's not, those kind of things. You just work through those because sometimes those have financial implications. Now there's a change order. We have to spend some more money. The client has to. And so just kind of working through those things and just being consistent in your process of how you do that. Those are, I think, things that help make for, I believe, successful business, whether it's architecture or something else. But I would say there's probably reasons why I've been at the same company for 40 years. There's reasons why I was their first technical employee drafting Pizza Huts, back in the day, or Burger Kings, and why I'm now one of the senior partners in the firm, and having the clientele and the type of projects we work on. So I just think some of that's important. And then some of these things about mentoring, I've always thought about the fact that when I was the baby architect, one of the senior partners would take me under his wing, and I learned a lot from him. He kind of, in essence, mentored me in the career. And so it's interesting what little habits and things I do that are like him, and some things I do differently than what he did. But the whole idea is, am I investing in the next generation of young architects? Am I to the point where is it such an ego thing for me that I won't let them do anything in the project and it's always got to be me, me, me? No. If they've got a better idea on how to design something than me, I'm all for it, because ultimately I want them to succeed. I want them to succeed because if they're succeeding, they're going to grow in the career, and then eventually they're going to buy me out. So I have a financial gain too, obviously, because I want the stock of the company to be well when I retire or sell out, so that cause that's part of my retirement too. So I do have that part of it, but you want to do it in a way where you respect them and you trust them, and you can rely on some ideas that they have that you may not have thought about. So I think those are some things I would think in terms of career. They probably apply to a lot of different areas of life. Relationships. There was a point, I'll just tell you about this. My wife, like I mentioned, my wife's Canadian. We were introduced by a matchmaker in the old fashioned way. We were in two different countries.
Wow.
This is before even the word internet was.
I haven't heard this part of the story yet.
I'll have the nutshell version.
Okay.
So I'm 21 years old. I'm on internship with an architect down at Lawton, Oklahoma, while part of my K-State work internship. And I'm taking a shower, and God hit me over the head and said, "You need to start looking for a wife, dude." I'm like, well, okay. And I dated a couple girls down there, and they were nice, but one joined the Army and wherever they went. So anyway, I go back to K-State, and then I graduate. Then I'm working at Howard and Hilmer, bachelor, 22, 23, 24, dating a couple girls, just nice girls, but nothing clicking. And then I found out this old retired pastor that I knew he was an American, but he had pastored a church in Canada, came to Kansas, got to know my family, and I found out he had a reputation for being a matchmaker. So I go over to him one day and I say, "I'm looking for a wife." And he goes, "Well, I've matched about 5 or 6 couples, and most of them are older, like widower kind of couples, like in their 50s and 60s kind of thing and above. But not you, you're 24 or 25. Like, well, I'm looking." So I forgot about it. 6 months later, I get this letter in the mail from him, and he had written Sandy, who was in Toronto working, got permission to give out her name and address, and said, "Ball's in my court." This is all letters, snail mail, no internet, no cell phone, nothing texting, none of that kind of stuff, no Snapchat. And
Probably better.
Yeah. But anyway, so I waited because I didn't look like I was desperate, but I wrote her. And then 3 weeks later, I get a letter back and I'm like, she's it. I know. This is the woman. And so long story short, it wasn't the best marriage proposal, but I proposed. And then 6 months later, she says no.
Oh,
I
wait.
can't.
So how did you propose?
So I flew up. I remember one time at my bachelor apartment, I laid out all of her letters on my table and I figured out which week in February was her birthday. And I called her. So I've been writing her from September to February. Never heard her voice. I called her up. Sure enough, I got the right week. So I invited myself up to Canada, to Toronto. And I go up in April for Easter that year. And then she comes down here in June to meet my side of the family and I propose. It wasn't the best. I just was kind of more, let's do this kind of thing, you know? I didn't have the ring yet, but I was going to get it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So then she's kind of taken back by that. And so 6 months go by. Now it's December. And so I fly to Detroit. She drives down from Toronto to Detroit. We stay at a mutual friend's place. And then I remember we toured the Henry Ford Museum all day. And then at the little cafe, she says to me, nope, I cannot marry you.
Dang.
And I'm like, she's so fantastic. If she's not it, I can't imagine who I'm going to marry. And I knew her well enough by then that if I wouldn't take no for an answer, she'd hightail it back to Canada so fast, I'd never see her again. So 20 months went by of silence. No letters, no phone calls, nothing.
20 months. Okay. So we're into like October the following year. Okay.
So a long time. So it was December, be all of the next year until May of the next year.
Okay.
And by this time I got my license as an architect and I bought a house and I'm moving on with life. Dated a couple other girls, but just, doesn't work, nothing. And so I wrote her figuring, well, by now, 20 months later, she's probably met a Canadian, married and have a kid on the way, who knows? So I wrote her, didn't hear a thing. So what does a bachelor do? You go and help church camp. And
she left you high and dry.
Yeah. So I had spent my vacation leading a middle school camp, come home from middle school camp, dirty clothes, bills in the mail. And I see there's a letter from Sandy. I'm like, forget the bills. I'm looking to read this letter. And she was at a new place in her life. A lot of things had changed and wanted to meet in a neutral city to discuss our relationship. So we did. We met in Chicago in October of that year. And by December, we knew we were getting married. And I proposed in January. And we got married in August. And the cool thing is, that pastor that matched us, we asked him to come back up to Canada. So we got a one-time dispensation from the Ontario government to marry us. So we're legal. But so after 4 years of basically, I guess you call that dating or courting or whatever it was, including 20 months of silence, we only saw each other all of 52 days. The day we got married. And then she immigrated here and she's still a Canadian.
Did you have to go through the whole no, she's a real wife. This isn't a sham.
Yeah. Yeah. Through the U.S. government, you had to be her sponsor and to prove that it wasn't a marriage of just convenience to get across the border, So yeah, but we've been married 33 years now.
Wow.
So yeah.
So that's how you marry a Canadian.
That's how I marry a Canadian. I remember driving across the border to get engaged, and the guy at the border, the Canadian, he asked me what I was doing. It was a bad snowstorm in January of that year. And I said, I'm going to get engaged to a Canadian. He goes, another American taking another Canadian away. Congratulations. But yeah. So.
Nice.
But.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that story. I hadn't heard that yet.
Yeah. They should write a book about that one. All my wife's girlfriends love to hear that story. And what's funny when Sandy and I tell it, my data points and my story is just a little different than hers. It's just kind of fun the fun part of telling the story together. So
yeah, our brains encode memories differently.
Yeah, we do.
And it is interesting how that works. Different topic for a different day. And maybe not even on this podcast.
Right.
But what is living the best life possible with the time you have left look like for you?
So I'm going to tell you a story. This kind of is a kind of an analogy or a parallel. So 160 years ago in 1861 was a guy born in England. His name was Samuel Chadwick. And Samuel Chadwick never married, but by would have been 1932, he was the president of a little college called Cliff College in England. And he had 12 guys that were kind of basic. It's a Bible school. And one of them was named Leonard Ravenhill. And those guys would be sent out on weekends to preach in little churches in the countryside in England, and then do different kind of crusades and kind of things during the summertime. Well, in the 50s, Leonard came to America. And he was really known, if you kind of look into who he was really known for preaching about revival in America, this kind of British grovelly voice. And he ended up becoming really good friends with a famous singer back in the 80s, Keith Green, who was killed at age 28 in a plane crash down in Texas. But anyway, what was cool was the fact that during those college years, when I was at K-State in the 80s, Leonard, through his radio program and et cetera, had some big influence on me, big influence on the way I was thinking. And I've never met the guy, right? He died when he was 97 or something like that. Anyway, but he had a real influence on me. And so there's a verse I love in scripture. It's 2 Timothy 2:2, and it says that basically Paul was investing in his life into Timothy, and he told him to basically invest in the next generation and the next generation. So the idea is Paul to Timothy to the next generation to the next, that's 4 generations. The idea is to finish well would be, what can I do, whether it's in career or in mentoring or in any aspect of life, how can I finish well from the perspective of leaving a legacy, not to build up my name, but to leave an impact on the next generation so that in aspects of faith, Christ is known, in aspects of career, architecture, alloy architecture, or whatever is society and culture is benefiting because of the fact of things that I've done to invest in even a few people for the next generation. Because the dependency is, if I'm going to invest in somebody else, if I'm going to invest in you, I'm expecting you to turn around and do the same thing for somebody else. And so that's the joy when I start seeing that next generation start to speak into the next generation. They're like, all right, they get it. And then that's, for me, that's finishing well.
With a book and a boot camp and now a podcast.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm selling you short. You went on a whole tour
right
of doing podcasts and speaking and signing books and babies and all that stuff.
Yep.
So, yeah, you're famous. But you're on a great, looks like you're launching a great path to have that level of impact. It's really awesome. So. Yeah.
One step at a time, one relationship at a time.
Yeah.
So, and as I always like to say, not perfectly, but increasingly so.
Yeah. I'll give that an amen.
Yep.
Well, architect, Mr. David Riffel, thank you so much for sharing some of your time and some of your intellect and life experience and all of that with us and the general world population to help us all prosper.
Yeah. Pleasure to be here. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Pleasure's all mine. So that'll wrap up this installment of Real Wealth Podcast for today. And if you scroll back through previous episodes, take a look at who's on there, different topics we've covered. I think now we're probably up to around the 30 range of lengthy or full length podcasts. And also check out our YouTube channel. Go ahead, like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff to help us grow our reach and our impact and help folks prosper to live the best life possible with the time they have left. I'll do it for today. Thank you.